There are three reasons why I decided to see Bullet Train. The first is that I had just generally heard some good things about it, and the trailer had appealed to me. The second is that I'm trying to watch films that I don't think are necessarily my kind of films, by which I mean action films. I'm not the biggest action fan, but I'm trying. And the third reason is that Sandra Bullock is in it, and I will watch anything she does. Now, it turns out she's not necessarily in it the way I was expecting or hoping, but nevertheless, that didn't really hamper my enjoyment. Of course, that does beg the question, did I enjoy it? And I did, in some ways, and I didn't in others. So I'm looking at this from two angles. One, for me personally, as a not really action film fan, and two, from a more analytical perspective in terms of the actual quality of the production. This was released this year, of course, 2022, directed by David Leitch, with a screenplay by Zak Olkewicz, based on the book by Kotaro Izaka. And needless to say, I haven't read the book, but if you've read the book and know how it compares and have any spoiler-free thoughts to share there, please feel free. And this is based on, well, it's set on a bullet train, which first of all, they visually look brilliant. And there are 5 different assassins on this, and there are 5 assassins in a briefcase. And I do think that their missions were explained quite clearly. I won't say too much more about that because, well, as somebody who's not that big on action, I'm not entirely sure what's considered a spoiler or what's considered just the norm. So I'm going to pussyfoot around a few things. Forgive me if I'm not going to as much detail as you'd like, but certainly there are plenty of places online that do go into a lot more detail. But it's about these assassins, and it starts off quite violently, and then it cuts to Brad Pitt and his character, and he plays a character nicknamed Ladybug, and I rather liked that. And I thought to begin with he'd be my favourite character. I thought he'd be the one I enjoyed the most. But once we followed his journey and saw him going onto the bullet train, we meet various other characters, including Tangerine and Lemon, played by Aaron Taylor Johnson and Brian Tyree Henry. And they are, of course, 2 other assassins, and I have to say my favourite is Lemon. I thought he was brilliant. Brian Tyree Henry gave a brilliant performance with that character, and I was genuinely fascinated. And that's one of the things that worked well for me with this film. The action element, I am going to admit straight away, I was more interested in it than I could have been. I was more interested in finding out, the common goals between these assassins and who was going to hurt whom and what the ultimate outcome would be, of course, more than I have been with some other action films. But the narrative, I wasn't completely bothered, to be quite frank, which sounds callous when you see some of the things that are at stake, but, it held my attention. But what worked for me the most, partly the characters, really brilliant characterization for some of them. But the standouts for me are Ladybug and Lemon. I can't work out if I like Prince or not. Brilliantly played by Joey King. Fabulous performance. But as a character, I don't think I like Prince. I'm not 100% sure. And the other thing as well is the comedy. There's a lot of comedy injected in this. Certainly kind of in the first 2/3, it kind of gets a lot more dark and intense as it progresses. But there's a lot of comedy. I think it overdid Thomas the Tank Engine. And if you haven't seen the film and you don't know what I mean by that, hopefully it will make you curious enough to watch it. But I think they overdid that a bit. It became quite interesting. I thought, okay, this may be a recurring thing. It's quite funny. It's light-hearted, putting some comedy amidst the darkness. But I think they overdid Thomas. Maybe one too many times or two too many times. But generally, I thought the dialogue between all of the characters really was brilliant. There are a lot of things that's very suspenseful that I personally didn't think was obvious. Again, if I was a seasoned action fan, maybe these were things that I'd pick up on sooner. But for me personally, there were bits of the narrative that came as a surprise that I hadn't predicted. It's very well shot. The soundtrack is brilliant, sometimes unexpected. We have some very lively, sometimes slightly cheesy songs in some of the more gritty moments, and the dichotomy between the two works very well. Some great editing as well. Really, generally, From a cinematic perspective, I'd say it's pretty fabulous. For me, as a not really an action fan, it was okay. I enjoyed the time spent watching it. I'm glad I've seen it. It was easier to follow than I'd anticipated, but I didn't love it. The narrative for me wasn't as compelling as, I find other types of narratives. But I am genuinely impressed by it. I'd be very interested to know what you think of it if you are a seasoned action fan, how it compares to potentially other similar films. And indeed, if you have a favourite character. But I think Lemon has to be my favourite. I enjoyed Bullet Train more than expected. I'm glad I gave it a go because there were things that pulled me towards it. I'm glad I listened to that. It's not my favourite film of this year, but I still rather enjoyed it.